What connects Croatia's national emblem to the man who announces Britain's taxes? The answer begins with pirates, a captured king, and 3 games of chess, and it ends with a piece of cloth on a medieval counting table. One is the red and white checkered board carried on Croatian flags, shields, and football shirts. The other is the Chancellor of the Exchequer, one of the most powerful figures in the British government, and the Prime Minister's next-door neighbour in Downing Street. Between them lies a simple pattern of alternating squares, a checkerboard, an alluring pattern that never quite stands still. One color advances, the other interrupts it. The eye moves across the pattern, yet the whole design remains perfectly balanced. And that tension between movement and control takes us to the coastline where almost nothing was settled, the Eastern Adriatic. At the end of the 10th century, Venice was not yet the enormous maritime empire of palaces, colonies, and merchant princes it would later become. It was a vulnerable city built in a lagoon. Its wealth depended upon ships carrying salt, timber, metals, and luxury goods between Western Europe and Constantinople. But to sail east, Venetian merchants had to pass along the Dalmatian coast. And Dalmatia is not a simple coastline. It breaks apart into islands, narrow channels, rocky headlands, and hidden coves. These offered shelter from storms. They also offered perfect hiding places for raiders. Among the most feared were the Narentines, a Slavic seafaring people based around the mouth of the river Neretva and the nearby islands. They raided merchant ships, took captives, and forced Venice to pay for safe passage through the Adriatic. They were, in practical terms, a pirate power. For years, Venice paid. Then, in 991 AD, Pietro II Orseolo became Doge. Orseolo understood that commercial privilege meant little if Venetian ships could not safely reach the markets that made those privileges valuable. He strengthened Venice's relationship with the Byzantine Empire, and in 992 AD, Emperor Basil II granted valuable trading rights to Venetian merchants. Then Orseolo stopped paying tribute to the Narentines. The attacks intensified. Ships were seized, goods were taken, merchants were captured. But this was never simply Venice against a band of pirates. Across the water lay the Croatian kingdom of Stjepan Derzislav. Croatian rulers controlled much of the hinterland, while the ancient coastal cities, Zadar, Split, Trogir, and others, guarded their own bishops, laws, elites, and privileges. Some looked towards Byzantium, some negotiated with Croatian kings, some welcomed Venetian protection. Venice wanted secure sea lanes and friendly ports. Croatian kings claimed authority over the coast, and Byzantium retained old imperial claims. The cities tried to preserve their autonomy, and the Narentines controlled islands and passages from which they could demand payment. Then the Croatian kingdom fractured. After Stjepan Derzislav's death, his sons fought for the throne. The succession struggle weakened Croatian authority along the coast, just as Pietro Orseolo prepared his move. In the spring of the year 1000, the Doge sailed south with a fleet. As Orseolo moved down the coast, communities sent delegations and offered oaths. Zadar accepted his authority. Other cities followed. Some submitted through negotiation, others resisted. By the end of the expedition, Orseolo had adopted the title of Duke of the Dalmatians. Venice had not conquered the entire coast, but it had announced a new ambition. The Adriatic was no longer merely a sea through which Venetians sailed, it was a sea they intended to command. In later centuries, that claim became ritual. Each Ascension Day, the Doge sailed out from Venice aboard the Bucintoro, the great state barge, surrounded by clergy, officials, and decorated boats. At the mouth of the lagoon, he cast a ring into the sea and declared, "We wed thee, sea, as a sign of true and perpetual dominion." The ceremony transformed a political claim into marriage, and dominion into destiny. Later Venetians remembered Orseolo's voyage as an early step towards their maritime empire, and towards treating the Adriatic almost as though it was its own gulf. And then history performed one of its strangest tricks. A tangled struggle involving piracy, dynastic war, imperial ambition, and fiercely independent cities became something much simpler: a chess match. According to Croatian legend, King Stjepan Dresislav was captured by the Venetians. His captor, Doge Pietro II Orseolo, offered him an unusual bargain. They would play chess. If Dresislav could defeat the Doge 3 times, he would win his freedom. The Croatian king won all 3 games. In some versions of the story, he also gained possession of several Dalmatian cities, and to commemorate his victory, he adopted a red and white chessboard as the emblem of Croatia. It's an excellent story. 2 rulers sit opposite each other, between them is a perfect grid. The confusion of the Adriatic is reduced to 2 sides, 2 colors, and a contest governed by rules. Every piece has a position, every move can be seen, and unlike history, the game can actually end. Centuries later, another checkerboard would perform a similar trick, not with kingdoms and coastlines, but with money. Now leave the Adriatic and come to London on budget day. The markets are waiting, government departments are waiting, people who sell houses, cigarettes, petrol, pensions, or almost anything that can be taxed are waiting. Outside number 11 Downing Street, the Chancellor performs a similar piece of political theatre. The black doors open, the cameras begin clicking, the Chancellor steps forward and raises the red budget box. Like Venice's marriage to the sea, Budget Day turns political power into theatre. For more than a century, that theatre centred on a wooden box covered in red leather, made around 1860 for William Gladstone and later carried by generations of chancellors. The box reveals nothing. It is displayed only to demonstrate that it could contain something: the national budget. Then the Chancellor is bundled into a gleaming ministerial car and swept the short distance to Westminster. Inside the House of Commons, the chamber is already crowded and loud. Opposition MPs prepare their attacks. Government MPs prepare to cheer measures they may not yet even have heard. Traders listen for changes in borrowing and taxation. Newspapers wait for a headline. Political careers may turn on what happens next. The Chancellor crosses the chamber towards the dispatch box as government MPs cheer and wave their order papers. The Prime Minister leans across with a final word, or perhaps a reassuring pat on the shoulder. Then the Speaker calls, "The Chancellor of the Exchequer." Britain's taxes, spending and borrowing, and perhaps the fate of government, are placed in the hands of an office named after a medieval checkerboard. The Exchequer took its name from the checkered counting table. In the 12th century, officials of the English crown met to examine the king's revenues. Our clearest account comes from Richard Fitzneal, treasurer under Henry II and later Bishop of London. Fitzneal wrote the Dialogue Concerning the Exchequer, presenting royal finance as a conversation between master and a questioning student. The student asks why the institution has such a peculiar name. The answer is the table. A large cloth was divided by lines into squares. Counters were placed upon it to represent sums of money. Different columns represented different values: pounds, shillings, and pence. As an account was examined, the counters were added, moved, or removed. It was not a chess game, but it looked sufficiently like a chessboard for the table, and eventually the institution itself, to become known as the Exchequer. The grid made calculation possible in a world without calculators, spreadsheets, or modern accounting systems. It made money visible. A debt had a position, a payment produced movement. An obligation that existed only in memory, promise, or parchment could be arranged before the king's officers and inspected with the eye. The checkerboard gave invisible money a physical form. Centuries passed, the counters disappeared, the cloth disappeared. The Exchequer became part of a modern financial state, but the name survived. And so on budget day, beneath the cameras, cheering MPs and waving order papers, one of the most powerful figures in modern Britain is still announced by a title carrying the memory of the medieval grid. The checkerboard appears elsewhere, The blue and white lozenges of Bavaria are not technically checks, but diamonds arranged in diagonal rows. They once belonged to the Counts of Bogen. When that family's male line died out in the 13th century, their lands and arms passed to the Wittelsbach dynasty. Over time, the emblem of one aristocratic family became the visual identity of Bavaria itself. Today, it appears on flags, football shirts, beer labels, and festival decorations. Few people who see it think of the Counts of Bogen. That is what successful symbols do. They escape their original owners. A repeating pattern has no obvious center and no natural ending. Even a small fragment suggests that the design continues beyond the edge of the shield, the flag, or the cloth. And a checkerboard does something particularly powerful. It divides the world into places. It makes movement visible. It allows opposition without collapse. On the medieval Exchequer table, uncertain revenues became counters in ordered squares. And in the Croatian legend, the tangled struggle for Dalmatia became a contest between two rulers. Whether on Croatia's shield or within the Chancellor's ancient title, the checkerboard makes power look beautiful and chaos look governed.